Hello. Before I introduce myself and what I'm going to be speaking about today, I first want to tell you a joke a friend of mine told me back in Australia. It was a Ukrainian girl who told me a joke very common in Ukraine about a man who really badly needed to use the bathroom. He had no money on him, but he goes into a restaurant and says, "I can't buy anything, but please, can you let me use your bathroom?" They're nice and say okay, so he goes and uses the bathroom. He comes back out and goes, "Thank you so much, and by the way, your light bulb blew up." I had no idea what she was talking about, and then she explained to me that some regions in the Ukraine are so poor that people are stealing each other's light bulbs. That was the joke. I didn't get the context. Now, my name is David, and I've been a tour guide for the past 7 years living here in Edinburgh. Last 3 years, I've done tours for 20,000 people, and that's just in the past 3 years. Growing up in Australia, I had some tastes when it came to other cultures. Some of my friends who had parents who recently immigrated, they were Aussies just like me, but when I went to their house I realised they did certain things differently. But that was just tastes. A sad thing about Australia is that I learnt that you only really need to learn English. That's it. Other places, they'll talk to you in English. It wasn't until I ventured outside of Australia is when I started really getting taste for other cultures, but I was kind of in this bubble. Because as a tourist, you go to places that are pre-planned, you go to touristy places. Even when you go to local places in the city, they speak to you in English, and you might partake in a few cultural things, but you're always in that nice, safe bubble of being a tourist. You're with other people who are also travellers, you're all speaking the same languages, doing the same things. Everything is safe. You don't have to deal with anything. Now, lucky for me, my father was born in Britain, so I also have a British citizenship. Being a Brit, I got to enjoy coming here to Edinburgh and getting myself a job as a tour guide. Now, I say I'm a Brit and an Australian, but to be honest, I'm way more Australian. When I became a tour guide, I noticed that there were some cultural differences, but I thought at first that was just stereotypes. To be honest, you only notice things that are really familiar to you, such as stereotypes. When I first went to London for the first time, this is the first time really outside of Australia, I step off the plane, I give my passport to the passport inspector and say, "G'day, mate." I never said "G'day, mate" in Australia. I have no idea why I said that, but I did. And I thought maybe they're just being like me. They're playing to the stereotype. And maybe if I stopped looking for that, I'd see what they really were. Now, I stopped looking for stereotypes, but I realised there are some merits to them. There is some truth behind them. People see different things in different ways. And I've noticed quite a lot of stuff and had cultural shocks. And by cultural shocks, it was just basically misunderstandings. For an example, when I was staying in a hostel, there was this really nice Spanish lady who was talking to me a lot, and when she'd talk to me, quite often she'd put her hand on me. Or if we're sitting on a couch, she'd sit closer than I was used to, and I thought, hey, she's attractive and I think she's into me. We're then walking down a cold street here in Edinburgh, and she actually clung on to me for some warmth. I thought I was so in, but I'm lucky I didn't make a move because then she introduced me to her boyfriend. I didn't do anything wrong, but I still felt kind of awkward. And that's just one of cultural shocks. And talking about that stuff, one time I put my arm around an Egyptian lady for a photo, and she goes, "Please remove your arm." I did, and I don't have a photo that she took, but I'm sure I looked pretty awkward. But there's more than just touch. There's many different things. Now I just want to go into 4 today. 4 topics that I've found very different between the British culture and other cultures. And they are face, time, touch, and nudity. Beginning with face. Now face, I'm using the concept of mensu. The idea of keeping yourself honourable, keeping yourself dignified, not breaking someone else's face. In the Western culture, we like to assign blame. A very common term is, someone has to take the fall for this. Because if no one is punished, then what's to stop it happening again? That's not the same in the Chinese and Japanese and a lot of Asian cultures. They have the concept of face, of calmness, of keeping your dignity because they are very shame sensitive. You don't want to shame someone else because they might be spiteful towards you or might try to break your face. For an example, when you go to a coffee shop and they give you a bad coffee, quite often you don't do anything about it, but you always think in your head, because in your head, you're tough. You're like in a Western. I should have taken this coffee right back and said, this is terrible, give me a refund or a new one. And when you see other people do that, you kind of admire them. It's okay to assign blame. It's okay to point out a problem and say, this is your problem, you have to solve it. That's not the same in those cultures that exercise face. If they're given a bad coffee, well, they might either A, keep that in mind, throw it out and just not come back, or if they need to point it out, they don't assign the blame, because they don't want spit in their coffee. It's all about being calm, being collective, and not breaking your own face as well. This comes up a lot when I'm doing tours and I'm speaking to people from those cultures and they don't understand me. Now they might be thinking, okay, I don't want to question him because maybe he'll think I'm stupid and he'll start breaking my face, or just maybe he's not doing his job right, but I don't want to embarrass him. So they'll smile, they'll nod, but if I give them a specific instruction and they don't follow it, it becomes very clear, and sadly, I normally get quite a bit frustrated. I shouldn't get frustrated, but I do. Now I've tried to find ways around it, and I'm going to go into the solutions at the end, after I've introduced the topics. The second topic I want to talk about is time. Now as Westerners, we often use what's called monochronic time. That's part of our culture. Time is money. Time is linear. How much can you get done in a day? It's all about the productivity. Then there's the polychronic time, more common in Latin cultures. That is not how much you can get done in a day, it's what can you get done in this day? Who are the people you're going to meet? And is this really worth your time? For an example, they're not about getting stuff done, they're about the experience. They're about the journey, not the destination. Say you have two men, Mr. Mono and Mr. Polly, and you're having a meeting with them. Mr. Mono arrives 5 minutes early, and to him, he might feel he's a little bit late. He doesn't want to waste any time, he wants to get to business. But Mr. Polly hasn't arrived yet, and he might be getting a little bit annoyed, thinking, God, he's rude. Mr. Polly finally arrives, say 10 minutes late, and he's happy, he's unapologetic, and he makes himself a coffee, only irritating Mr. Mono even more. Mr. Polly, he greets you both kindly. He wants to know a bit about your day. He wants to start a conversation before you get to business. So you have a small conversation to be polite, then you get to business, and when you get up to the allotted time for the meeting, just say that you're still talking, there's still more to discuss. Mr. Mono goes, right, I've got somewhere else to be, see you later. Mr. Polly looks at Mono and thinks, God, he's rude. We're having a conversation. Do I really want to do business with this man who has no interest in me, only has interest in the money on the table? For Mr. Mono, though, it's like, well, the money on the table, that's the most important thing. Yeah, you want to maybe like the guy you're dealing with, but as long as they get the product out, or as long as the money comes through, that's all you need. I mean, in a monochronic culture, most people, they don't like their bosses. But That's not a big deal. I don't like my boss, but I'm getting paid. In a polychronic culture, I'm sure they don't always like their bosses either, but it's a bigger issue for them. Because if they don't like the people they're working with, to them, is it really worth the experience? You see, as much as us monochronic people think we're more logical, the polychronic people are a lot more intuitive. They want to actually know the people they're dealing with. They want to spend time with them. And that comes across in a lot of different ways. There's a reason why we use the term romantic in English to mean chivalrous. Those people in later cultures speak romantic languages. They are interested in talking to you. They're interested in knowing you. That can be very charming, very refreshing. It can also be quite annoying when you just want to get work done. Last thing I want to talk about, and these things overlap, and that is nudity and touch. Now, starting with touch. I went over a few stories earlier about the Spanish lady touching me. I thought she was flirting with me. And then me putting my hand around an Egyptian lady and telling me, please take that hand away. Personal space is different in different cultures. And I think with the Western culture, well, I should say the British culture, there's always that, maybe you give them a handshake when you meet them. If you're really close to the person, you might give them a hug, but that's it. In other cultures, they're a bit more touchy. A way to connect to a person is to actually connect with them, to actually touch them. To give you an example, there was a study once done about PE teachers in both England and Spain, and the PE teachers in England, they don't really touch their students. They give a lot of instructions, but they won't position them correctly, when over in Spain, they will actually position the students. And it makes sense. I mean, if you're doing something physical, you want to make sure they're doing it the right way, so they don't injure themselves. Then we get to nudity. I didn't realise how British Australia was until I started travelling. Now here we have statues they'll be of naked people, but there's always that bit of modesty. They've got their hand in just the right place, or they've got something covering them. And that's the kind of statues we have back in Australia. When I was going through Belgium for the first time, I saw these statues of naked women where their head was just a pole and ball, and same with their arms and legs, but the rest of the body was really well detailed. I know in Australia that would have been scandalous. Also, when I worked in Prague, there's a statue in Prague Castle called Youth. Now, it's quite common to rub statues. Here in Edinburgh, we have a statue called of David Hume, and people rub his toe for wisdom. That statue in Prague Castle of a naked boy, they rub another part of his body, maybe for wisdom, I'm not too sure. I had the privilege of working in Prague for a year as a tour guide as well. It was a lot of fun. Going to one of the gyms, I found it quite awkward when the cleaning lady came in as I was getting changed and started sweeping the floor. Now, I covered up, but I thought it was my mistake. What have I done wrong? Have I not read something? A few days later, when I was coming out of the shower, I knew the sauna wasn't working properly, and there was one of the female staff members in the male changing room fixing the sauna. At the time, I was completely naked with my towel drying my hair. I wish I was drying something else at the time. I was really embarrassed. She knew I was there. She didn't stare at me. She was focused on her job. So why is this? Well, going back to, let's say, touch. Well, before I get into touch and nudity and why, I have to actually pause because this only lets me record for so long. You see, us Westerners, we associate touch and nudity with sex, and they are three different things. In terms of touch, one of my sister's ex-boyfriends who worked in childcare, there was a strict policy that none of the male child carers can touch the children other than on the hands. Now, these little girls would come up to him and go, I need a hug, and he'd just go, oh, high five. He couldn't touch them. Also, some of the young boys, they need to get changed. And it could be for a very embarrassing reason, and they need help. And I'd ask him, can you help me change? And he'd say, I'm sorry, no. And he'd go get the female colleagues, and that made the boys even more embarrassed about the situation. Because the Western media, we just love sex offenders. Bad news is big news. And especially amongst young men, we get quite afraid that anything that we do, if when flirting with someone, if I accidentally touch the girl, I could be seen as a sex offender. That's quite common. I also remember my sister telling me when she recently had her little baby Violetta. She'd be walking around with Violetta, and the girls would look and go, "Oh, what a beautiful baby." The boys would just look straight through her. "Oh, she's not there. She's not there. I don't want to smile at her. They'll think I'm a perv." In terms of nudity, well, it sort of serves a practical purpose sometimes to get naked. A friend of my sister's, a German lady, she was over in Australia and she noticed that us Australians, after a day at the beach, we wrap our towel around the bathers and then we drive home and get changed. And she thought that's stupid. Just take off all your clothes on the beach and put on your normal clothes and then head home. My sister said, you don't want to get naked on a beach. People will look at you. They might even, give you some rude comments or whistle. She thought that was crazy. You're getting naked for a reason. You need to get changed. Why are people staring and whistling at you? There is a reason behind it. You see, the more people are educated about touch and nudity and sex, the more they can tell the difference. Also talking about nudity, I remember going into a sauna in Prague. Now, this was a unisex sauna. I opened the door and inside were 3 naked women. And I thought, oh dear God, I'm in the female sauna. So I shut the door and ran out. And the girls giggled. And I realised, wait, hold on. That's the unisex sauna. They're just in there naked. Now I thought I'm just going to not use the sauna that day, but I realised, hey, I'm paying for it. I should go inside. So I walked in there, I sat down on my towel, and believe me, I just stared forward or I stared down into my lap. My eyes didn't go anywhere. Even though I was the one wearing something, I felt quite uncomfortable. But here's the deal. The more educated a culture is about sex, the more they know the difference between touch, sex, and nudity. And us Brits, we're somewhere in the middle. So what are some solutions to these issues? These cultural clashes? Well, going back to face. First of all, don't get angry. I'll stress this enough. Don't get angry when you realise they're not understanding you. They're just trying to be polite. Keep that in mind. Also, if you have to point out a problem, because sometimes with a joke that they don't get and they giggle at the wrong time or something, you can let that go. But if you have to point something out, don't point out the person to blame. Just point out the problem and do it politely. There's a great story about a bike company over in America who bought their bikes from Japan. 2 of the executives went over to the factory and they wanted to ride out some of the new bikes they were getting. And they realised the bikes were squeaking. So when they brought the bikes back, one of the executives said to the manager of the factory, the bikes are a bit squeaky, but thank you for the ride. He goes back to America and the board members say, why don't you get angry? You should have figured out why they were squeaky, found the person who was making the problem, and then deal with the issue. And he said, no, that's not how it works. You see, if I got angry at the manager and wants some more information, I'm breaking his face. I'm losing face to him because I'm getting angry. I'm not keeping myself calm and collected. And he might send over the bike squeaky just to spite me. Instead, I just was polite and pointed out the problem. When the bikes did arrive in America, the squeaky problem had been solved. Another thing to do is to show them the solution rather than tell them. If you realise you're not communicating well enough or they just don't understand you, just smile, show them the thing. Like, to give you an example, I have to sell tickets, as I said earlier, And I realised these two girls who wanted to buy tickets still had no idea they had to go to the desk to buy. No matter how many times I said, oh, it's just over there, go buy the tickets, they still started looking it up on their phones. And I knew it's cheaper if they actually bought it at the desk. So I said, oh, follow me, I'll show you I'll give you some more information. I took them over to the desk, said, this is the lady here, she can help you out, she also has more information. And I left it in her capable hands. So I showed them the solution rather than pointed out the problem. Now, if you do have to break someone's face just a little bit, because they'll get embarrassed when they realise that they don't understand you. Not long after that, offer them a compliment. Maybe it's just something nice or unusual that they're wearing, or maybe it's something about them. Hey, you've got a really nice you're really good at speaking English. You got to remember, as an English speaker, you expect other people to speak English to you. And the fact that they are speaking English to you, well, that's good on them, not good on your culture. Next thing I want to talk about, so the next solution to time, well, unfortunately you have to just leave time for both. Now, this could be very frustrating because there is no perfect solution to this. But you do have to make time for both. Going back to Mono time and, I should say Mr. Mono and Mr. Polly. Mr. Polly, what he wants from, say, a meeting. He wants to know, first of all, is this being productive? Is this worth the money? Is there a more effective way of doing this? So when he shows up early to the meeting and you know Mr. Polly's going to be late, make sure his time is not being wasted. Give him a moment to relax. Hey, thank you for coming. Grab yourself a coffee. Have a moment to yourself. Also, I'm getting the agenda ready. Is there anything you want me to add? In terms of tour guiding, the people who show up early, I give them an extra story. I give them a bit more to the experience. Make sure their time is just not wasted. When Mr. Polly arrives, and here's something that could get a little bit hard, but don't be mad at them for being late. In fact, they'll probably come in with an attitude more positive than Mr. Mono did when he came early. Hi, it's good to have you here, and even though they are late, don't mention that, just tell them, alright, we're going to get this thing started, but before we get it started, do you want to get yourself a coffee? Do you want to get yourself ready? You have to make sure they also have the time to get ready as well, because they're expecting that. Now, when the meeting is coming up to the end and Mr. Mono has to go, thank him for coming. If Mr. Polly feels a little hurt that Mr. Mono is going early, just spend the time with Mr. Polly. Be the person in between. And say, hey, is there anything else you want to add before we wrap this thing up? I mean, I'm here. Anything you want to reflect upon? Give them the time as well. Remember, he's more about, Mr. Polly, he's more about the journey. He is more about the person, he's more about the people he meets. He's also more about the experience. As for touch and nudity, that's very much a personal thing. Touch and nudity, it's really up to you. I always find a firm handshake is a good thing. I once shook the hand of a Middle Eastern lady who tipped me. She gave me a bit of a shocked look that I was touching her, but she accepted it. She knew I was just being polite. And shaking someone's hand's not the worst thing. Obviously, don't do anything you're not comfortable with. But I always think, let the other person lead. Let the customer lead. Hey, if they want to get a photo taken and they stand up really close to you, you can put your arm around them. If they're keeping their personal space, you know not to put your arm around them. Also, if they're doing something that's a bit too full on with you, do what that Egyptian lady did to me and just be polite but firm. Now, I know there's a bit of a difference when it comes to power dynamics. I know once having a conversation with my boss, who is this very, very nice Spanish lady, she was angry at me. This was after work, by the way, so it's casual, but she was angry at me for something I did during a tour, and she started telling me off and she started poking me in the chest. Now, I kind of let it go for a bit, and then she stopped being angry at me, but she was still poking me in the chest, and I went, you're poking me, and she goes, I know. And she just kept going for a while. Now, in retrospect, I should have just told her to stop. But she was my boss. I was a bit nervous about that. The solution to that is, well, remember, yeah, she's higher on the chain, or they are higher on the chain, I should say. At the same time, they're higher on the chain, they've got more to lose. So don't be afraid to speak up. And as long as you're polite, and you can always add a compliment somewhere along the line afterwards, everything is fine. Nudity. Well, it's up to you how much you want to reveal. Some people say, hey, the more open you are with the body, the more comfortable you feel within your skin. To be honest, there are some secrets I'd rather keep between me and my wife. By the way, I am married. It's one of the reasons why I stayed here in Edinburgh. I got a beautiful wife. Anyway, don't be offended though if you encounter nudity. I mean, obviously there's context matters a lot. If someone is naked when they shouldn't be naked, yeah, you have all right to be upset and angry with them. But if you're going through a different country, if you're encountering different people, or even if, say, you're talking to someone in a more casual setting, say it's in a sauna or something, and then they get completely naked in front of you, just remember, they're not doing this to crack onto you. That is just their culture. The more you understand, the more you understand about sex, I'm just going to say it right this way, the more you're educated on sex, the more open you are about that sort of stuff, the more you understand it, the more you'll realise touch and nudity are not always related to sex. Once in a hostel, a lady, I'm not sure where she was from, but we're in a dorm. She was keeping to herself, but at one point she got pretty much naked as she was getting changed. Now there were a few other people in the dorm, some of them men, and they looked over and they let out a few whistles, which is extremely rude. She also thought it was rude as well. I felt awkward even catching sight of her, because it was none of my business. Later on in the communal room, one of the girls spoke to her about it, because to be honest, it was a topic of conversation, especially much where says, well, that girl got naked in the room. One of the ladies spoke to her and said, it's not very common here. She mentioned that it's quite rude that someone whistled at her, and it is rude. But the thing is, she wasn't showing off. She was keeping to herself. And the fact that she got completely naked at one point doesn't really matter. We should have kept to ourselves as well. That was her business. Now, it was a bit rude of me to also eavesdrop on the conversation, but the lady who was speaking to her at the end said, I admire the amount of confidence you have, because I could not do that. She ended with a compliment, which made the other lady smile. And that's something I learnt from that conversation. Now, in conclusion, there's a few overlapping things I want to talk about, which I've probably gone into a bit, but the first of all is compliments. They're so easy. Give them out like hey. If something becomes awkward, just compliment the person. You don't have to compliment them straight away. You can talk about other things and then eventually get around to it, but compliments are a really easy way of giving someone's face back and also calming an awkward situation. Secondly, try not to get angry. Getting angry doesn't make things faster. In fact, calmer is smoother and smooth is fast. Try to keep your cool head. But the last thing is try to understand. People do things differently than you do. And it's not because they're weird, it's just because they're different. The more you understand someone, the more you can understand where they come from and why they do certain things, the more you can connect with them. Because understanding is key to communication.